That's class.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I have those type of my dead friends.
That's from my old computer.
Okay.
Oh,
Now, we always hear about good careers being about law or IT specialists or in healthcare, but you'd think with all the environmental issues with wars over resources and gas prices going up, you'd think you'd hear more about the environmental side and what careers deal with that. Is there a career that deals with that? Well, actually is. It's called environmental science. Now, what is environmental science exactly? It's a multidisciplinary science of physical sciences, which includes biology, physics, and zoology. And it's a relatively new science compared to all those other ones. And it being a combination of all of them together is just not being used in practice as an actual career. Even though it's been studied, it's never actually been used as a full-time career before. Mostly because the involvement of man has increased over the years, ever since the Industrial Revolution with making more machines and factories. It's gone more toll on the environment than man has ever done before. So now our involvement within the world is becoming more relevant than it used to be. And the more advanced we get, the more we'll have to concern ourselves with how much resources and how we deal with how do we use the land that we have. Now, according to the Department of Labor, the environmental science career is actually predicted to grow by 15% by the year 2022. And the median wage annually is a little bit over $63,000. And you're probably wondering, how do you even get into a career of environmental science? Like, what does that even mean? Like, what would you have to do if you were in a career of environmental science? Now, most positions are entry level, which require a bachelor's degree. And if you wanted to seek higher pay or higher position, you'd have to get a graduate level education to do so. But as you see here, there's multiple different routes that one could take with an environmental science degree or related major. Because most people would think environmental science as being either an environmental teacher or someone out there in the mud digging up worms, which is part of it when it says scientific and technical consulting. That has to do with firms that deal with private companies to deal with how they should create their buildings so they have standards with the EPA law, which is kind of similar to how lawyers work with their firms. They're hired out to other private companies and individuals. But there's also, if you notice here, there's state and federal governments, so that you can actually work in policy with your major. So instead of just being a quote-unquote scientist, you can actually be a policymaker and be involved with law. And maybe in your older years, you just go a full politician. So the environmental science career isn't just about being a science person. But there's also engineering, which is more of an inside job for those who don't like the outdoors, but still want to have an impact on the environment. And as you look at all these different routes one can go and how you specialize for yourself, career also affects everyone around us. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the BP oil spill that happened in 2010. It was an unprecedented amount of oil that was spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. And this is a picture of off the Louisiana coast when that happened in 2010. And unfortunately, since with environmental science still being a new career and not having as much funding as other ones does, there wasn't very good methods of cleaning up the oil other than what the traditional had been, which is controlled burns. Now, doing this in a small scenario was never that much of an impact, but when we have such an unprecedented amount of oil spill and disaster, this only would make the problem worse, because then it turns it from a water problem to an air problem. And they're still studying those effects today, and they never actually burned all the oil that's inside it. There's still plumes of it that reside in the Gulf of Mexico that can never finish to be burned out. And environmental science actually need to test both the effects on the people and the animals and the environment around the Louisiana area, especially since we get a lot of seafood that comes out of the Gulf. It's important, in conjunction with the FDA, to be able to use methods to better control these types of disasters so these don't come up. Now, my own personal experience with working with environmental science was I had an internship with the EPA. That involved me working with several specialists, but my main mentor was an environmental engineer, which is what we mentioned earlier. So he wasn't really an outdoorsy person, but he stayed inside, and we were able to make prototypes of machines that would help analyze air such as the one you saw. In fact, when the 9/11 attacks happened and those giant plumes of smoke came in after the buildings fell down, he was called upon to create a machine to analyze that dust. to see how it affect the human lungs. Now that kind of effect is greater than what you'd imagine to be an environmental science career that isn't just about the animals and outdoors. This is how humans react with each other and with the world. Now, so in conclusion, as long as man has an impact on the world around us, which it shall in the future, because as resources decline and populations increase, our involvement can only become greater, which is why this discipline will continue to grow and will always be needed as long as we have an impact on the world around us.